Wow. So this is like an interesting party or family reunion with really great people here and a good vibe in the room. I'm sorry to break it, but we actually do have to get started. I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm the dean, and I'm really delighted to be here. I'm going to be very brief because there's actually another introduction, and then there are other speakers, and then there's a panel, and I want to get you to the meat of the evening. But I have a couple housekeeping comments, and then I do want to say a couple words of my own. So a quick reminder that we have live captioning. So if you're streaming into us via Zoom, you can do that with the little CC. You should know that by now at the bottom of the screen. Or you can hit that QR code and make that work. I also want to invite you to join us for the next two public events here at the JSD on tomorrow. Tomorrow. It never ends. Tomorrow we are hosting a lecture by Miriam Shabani, who's teaching with us this semester as the Aga Khan Design Critic in Architecture, and a fantastic addition to the school this semester. Miriam will deliver a lecture called South-South Cosmogonies. South-South Cosmogonies, featuring the work of her practice called New South, based in Paris. And then on Wednesday, October 29th, the architect and historian Mabel O. Wilson, coming to us from GSAP in New York, will deliver a lecture entitled The Measure of Freedom and Unfreedom, which is this fall's Jacqueline Tyrwhitt Urban Design Lecture. For more information and to see the full lineup of upcoming events, please look at our fabulous GSD website. So welcome to this event, which is the launch of HDM's issue number 53, called Reuse and Repair, which is just such a profound topic. And I have to say that I love the opening to it, referring to Carl Sandburg as a fellow Chicagoan. Jeanne, I love the reference to Carl Sandburg, but the put the city up, tear the city down, put it up again, let us find a city. We talk a lot about reuse and repair in terms of buildings, but I think actually understanding it's the whole milieu of the design environment that we're understanding as a space of reuse and repair, I think is incredibly profound and very timely. The Harvard Design Magazine was reimagined. You can find a seat, Scott. I'm sure you can. There should be one at least available. And so the Harvard Design Magazine was reimagined. When was that? In issue 49 that we reimagined it, or 48? 48. So this is 53, so that's 5 issues in the new regime. It was reimagined essentially as a space for faculty to explore topics together. And so we pair, each issue is a pair of faculty working together on a topic. And this one, I think we're really thrilled to have the pair stretch across 2 schools at Harvard. So Jeanne Gang here at our school and Liz Cohen from FAS. And it really is an opportunity for faculty to dive into a topic that they think is important and have the school's resources help support them to essentially dive into that topic with different writers and fantastic images. And I want to thank Ken Stewart, who will speak next, our editor-in-chief, and Meg Ryan Sandburg, no relationship to Carl, our managing editor, for all the work that they do in making this possible. And so, yes, a whoop whoop for those two. But I find this, particularly at a time when being a faculty member isn't always the easiest thing, or being part of academia isn't always the easiest thing, having this space to explore and do research and find important people to come together in conversation in the magazine, I think is really critical. And so I am very grateful to Liz and Jeanne for putting in the work, and to Ken and Meg and the rest of the team who worked on the editorial and design part of the magazine. And so I just want to thank you all and sort of welcome everyone, and then turn things over to Ken. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm Ken Stewart. I'm the editor-in-chief of Harvard Design Magazine. It's really wonderful to see so many people here tonight. The issue, as Sarah shared, is guest edited by Jeanne Gang and Lizabeth Cohen, both of whom are, of course, very familiar faces to everyone here at the GSD and Harvard more broadly. And we're really excited to, I can say after like many months of Zoom meetings together, it's really exciting for us personally to be able to see each other in person, and to have all of us here together for this event. I want to get out of the way so that you all can hear from Jeanne and Liz directly, as well as a few of our other contributors. But first, I'd like to just make some formal introductions and explain a little bit about how tonight will unfold. Much of tonight's event is about articulating the expansiveness of Jeanne and Liz's theme: reuse and repair of what, when, for whom, and why. And I'd say in particular, it will get at some of the deeply entrenched forces that make repair and reuse of our existing built environment so challenging, at the same time that doing so is so urgently necessary. In just a few moments, so first you'll hear from Liz, who will reflect on the historical dimension of the theme reuse and repair. Liz, as everyone knows, is the Howard Mumford Jones Research Professor and University Distinguished Service Professor in the History Department here at Harvard. She's the author of many books, including most recently the book Saving America's Cities, Ed Logue and the Struggle to Renew Urban America and the Suburban Age. From 2011 to 2018, she was Dean of Harvard's Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. She's also an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Society of American Historians, and has many other accolades to her credit. Her current book project is a co-authored study comparing the impact of deindustrialization on people, places, and politics in the US and France. Following Liz's remarks, then she will introduce Daniel Abramson, who will speak about obsolescence in architecture and real estate development, a topic he has written extensively about, and which he contributed a brilliant essay to the issue for. And then after hearing from Daniel, Jeanne Gang will then take the podium and speak about the state of reuse and repair in practice and pedagogy today. As all of you here know, Jeanne is an architect, also the Kajima Professor in Practice of Architecture here at the GSD, and founding partner of Studio Gang, an international architecture and urban design practice. She's recognized for a research-based design process that derives insight from ecological systems that looks to strengthen relationships among individuals, communities, and environments. Her award-winning projects span scales and typologies, with an increasing focus on the adaptive reuse and reinvention of existing structures. Locally here in Cambridge, she's the architect of two new major buildings, in the new Enterprise Research Campus just across the river in Alston, which she also co-led the master planning for. Her most recent book, The Art of Architectural Grafting, proposes a fresh concept for making additions to older buildings inspired by horticultural practice and the regenerative ability of plants. Following Jeanne's remarks then, Jeanne will introduce Alison Von Glinow and Lapshi Kwong of the architectural practice Kwong Von Glinow. Alison and Lapshi are going to present an actual instance of reuse that we commissioned for this issue. They'll present a design proposal they produced for an existing public pavilion located in downtown Chicago along the shore of Lake Michigan. And the project is also currently on view for any of you who may happen to be in Chicago, on view as part of the Chicago Architecture Chicago Architecture Biennial currently on view. And I don't know, but maybe we'll get to see a few images of that installation tonight. Finally, at the end of all of that, Jeanne and Liz are going to get everybody together here for an intense Q&A and discussion. Before Liz does take the stage, though, I just want to extend my profound thanks to everyone who contributed to and otherwise was involved in making the issue possible. Jeanne and Liz, I just want to thank you so much for what has really been an outstanding experience for both Meg and I, and for your commitment to the issue. It's just really been a tremendous honor and pleasure for all of us to have had this opportunity to work on it with you. Thank you also to everyone who contributed to the issue. There are 44 contributors to this issue, and I can't mention everyone, but I at least want to mention or acknowledge a few that are present with us tonight. In person, of course, we have Danny and Alison and Lapchi. The writer Imani Perry, writer and Harvard faculty member Imani Perry is with us as well. She wrote a terrific essay on her childhood years living in Peabody Terrace and reflecting on the influence that the design of that building had in those formative years of her life. Also an essay that is accompanied by some really wonderful new images that the artist David Hart produced that incorporate photographs from her youth together with photographs of the existing structure. Angela Pearson, who is visiting us all the way from Oklahoma, contributed an article on Washington, D.C.'s magnificent brutalist buildings and their importance, and the importance of their conservation. David Fixler is also here somewhere, I believe there is. David participated in a wide-ranging roundtable that Jeanne led on the place of reuse and repair in architectural education today. And then online, I think we have Margot McDonald from the Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and also Roberto Fabri, a specialist in architectural heritage in the Middle East, and who is based in Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. And then finally, just another big thank you to Meg Sandburg, who I don't know if she's in here, she might be out at the table, but Meg is the operational force really behind the magazine. I also want to thank Francesca Johansson and Alyssa Anderson from Studio Gang for their amazing collaboration. Alexis Mark, who are the magazine's art directors for another beautiful issue, and just everyone else. There are just too many people to name who help coordinate all the many small moving parts in a publication like this. So thank you. And now, without further ado, Lizabeth Cohen. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here tonight to introduce you to Harvard Design Magazine, issue number 53, Reuse and Repair. It has been a very long time in coming. I dug back into my inbox and found Dean Sarah Whiting's invitation to me to join this enterprise, which was dated April 14th, 2023. So the issue has been 2.5 years in the making. Now, there's been an advantage to this very long gestation, which turned out to be the opportunity to incorporate into our issue, by organizing poignant conversations with key actors, important contemporary challenges involving reuse and repair, such as coping with the devastating LA wildfires and with the destructive war in Ukraine. These tragic losses brought immediate relevance to an essay that we had already commissioned on rebuilding after disasters by Yun Fu and Manis Leung. These have been 2.5 years of great stimulation and collaboration between an historian, me, and an architect, Jeanne Gang. I have long admired Jeanne's work as an important architect, but also as a thinker about architecture and environments. So it has been a great privilege to work together on this issue. And Jeanne brought with her additional talent from Studio Gang, specifically Francesca Johansson and Alyssa Anderson. They were an enormous help to me, to Jeanne, and to our hardworking and committed HDM editors at the GSD, Ken Stewart and Meg Sandburg. I thank everyone who worked on this issue for their imaginative ideas, their high standards for excellence in writing, analysis, and visual presentation, and dedication to making this issue as strong as possible. I couldn't be more proud of the process and the product. So thank you to everyone who helped create this compelling and beautiful 53rd issue of the Harvard Design Magazine. When Sarah Whiting first pitched the idea to me of co-editing an issue of the HDM on reuse and repair, I wasn't sure how our collaboration would work out, and specifically what I, as an historian, could bring to the topic. But as we all talked and the issue began to take shape, it became clear to me how my historian's perspective could be most relevant and helpful. Historians put people, places, events, and longer-term developments in context to understand better the who, the how, and the why change takes place. I saw my role then as bringing that awareness of context to our issue. For our topic of reuse and repair, that meant attending to the context of time as well as space. Well, Jeanne brought great insights into the reuse or repair of particular buildings, larger projects, and the current state of architectural pedagogy. I sought to locate physical structures and contemporary realities in historical time and larger social, economic, and political settings, which are often manifest in downtowns, cities, and sometimes nations. Let me give you a few examples. First, the context of time. The entire concept of reuse and repair needs to be situated historically. Our issue highlights how this approach requires a paradigm shift, particularly in the United States, away from emphasis on value and profit based on newness, as well as a willingness to accept collaborative credit for design rather than seek single authorship. Daniel Abramson's work on the historical embrace and more recently increasing rejection of the notion of architectural obsolescence is appropriately our first essay in the issue, and you will hear more from him shortly. Here is the second context, and I should say that the slides I'm going to show are all illustrations from the magazine itself. Here's the second context. Any one building needs to be embedded in its own history from its creation onward, which frequently involves reinventions, adaptive reuses at key moments in time. The essay, The Glass Hospice, by David Gesson and Georgina Klieg, recounts how Philip Johnson modified his own canonical modernist glass house in New Canaan, Connecticut, to accommodate his disabilities as he aged. The authors regret that, unfortunately, most of those adjustments made over time were hidden by Johnson himself and have been ripped out of the building that thousands visit today, robbing the public of observing those adaptations and normalizing the natural evolution of a home like Johnson's over a long lifetime. In contrast, in his essay, Brian Goldstein shows us how the Black racial identity of prominent architect Max Bond drove him to design in accordance with his political values of political participation, self-determination, autonomy, and social justice, always striving to give flexibility to the user and lessen the control of the architect. The third context is one of place. No building stands alone as an architectural specimen. Every building exists in a larger gestalt, a block, a neighborhood, a city, a region, and a nation, all of which are ever-changing. Sarah Cornelson's essay, Repairing Broken Homes, Loss and Redemption in Detroit, recounts how foreclosed and dispossessed bungalows, now vacant in the Brightmoor neighborhood of Detroit, had once been part of an idealistic vision of providing working people with affordable homes of their own in a planned subdivision of over 1,500 small houses. an American dream that today is an American nightmare for many. Most architects and planners, in fact, consider this gestalt, eyeing more than the one plot of land on which a new building will stand, and are being fully aware of its neighbors and its setting. We do well, then, to bring the same sensitivity to recognizing a more expansive site to our efforts to reuse and repair. Many of the essays and images in this issue, in fact, showcase admirable recent projects that model just how to do this. My own contribution, an interview with Mayor Jamal Tito Brown of Youngstown, Ohio, explores his efforts to revitalize the city's downtown after decades of economic struggles following the collapse of the steel industry in the late 1970s and the 1980s. Appreciation of the challenges and possibilities of one current city project, the renovation, environmental remediation, and adaptive reuse of a major building downtown, requires understanding that it was once Strauss's department store, for many years the major retail attraction at the city's core. Stunning photographs by Noritaka Minami accompanying my interview convey the spatial legacy of the building's origins, as well as its centrality to the larger commercial district. Other photographs of Minami of Youngstown's downtown reveal how layers of the past are still visible today, as well as how individual buildings interrelate to create a streetscape that is more than the sum of its parts. Finally, one more kind of historical context is worth mentioning. That is, the place of any particular building in the lives of those who have occupied it, whether as a residence, a workplace, or some other usage. Here I would point you to the centerfold of our issue, the very personal and poignant essay by Harvard professor Imani Perry about growing up in the modernist monument of Peabody Terrace. While observers then and now routinely criticize the austerity of this brutalist tower, which was built to be married student housing, Perry tells a very different story about how Giuseppe Louis Serre's building bred interaction and tolerance within a very diverse community. Because our magazine's theme of reuse and repair represents a significant break with the long-standing valorization and prestige associated with a brand new building, a brand new creation, which was often placed on top of the ruins of a previous structure that had been demolished to make use for that one, we have invited Daniel Abramson to give you a taste of his essay on the historical tension between obsolescence and sustainability. Let me now introduce him before inviting him to come up to the podium. Daniel Abramson is professor and director of architectural studies at Boston University. He's the author of 3 books, including Obsolescence and Architectural History, which was published in 2016. Daniel's current work is on post-war American government architecture related to urban renewal, federalism, and citizenship. He recently spent a term working on this project at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, and this month he published an article on the project in the journal Gray Room. Please join me in welcoming Danny Abramson to the podium.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to have a chance to share this work. Okay, oops, let me go back. There we go. I was invited to contribute here an historical perspective on reuse and repair, to see them as frameworks for understanding and managing change in architecture, which themselves are changeful. That is, reuse and repair lie in an historical sequence of paradigms for comprehending and designing change in architecture. What have been these recent successive paradigms of change? For centuries before the 20th, change in architecture was conceived as slow, adaptive, and organic, fundamentally continuous with the past. Then, in the early 20th century, a new kind of change, the seemingly senseless destruction of very young commercial buildings, had to be rationalized. Engineer Reginald Pelham Bolton identified unpredictable factors external to buildings' material fabric, which so devalued even recent structures financially, they became economically unviable, that is, obsolete, and therefore replaced by higher performing alternatives. Organizations like the National Association of Building Owners and Managers, led by its executive Earl Schultz, produced statistical surveys to determine the projected lifespan of commercial buildings for favorable tax code rates. Thus, architectural obsolescence came to appear actuarially, naturalistically inevitable, a myth of modern life. Obsolescence gave a name and a logic to capitalism's constant churn, a paradigm of ceaseless, rapid expendability and replacement, facilitated by the federal tax code, made to seem rational, natural, even progressive. Post-war architects largely accepted obsolescence as a truth of change and adapted designs to it. Factory shed structures enabled open-plan internal flexibility to ward off obsolescence. Megastructures harmonized short-life capsules and longer-life frames to ensure the adaptability of the whole. Some, like Cedric Price, openly embraced obsolescence and expendability, imagining his designs to be, quote, short-life toys, unquote, for liberating play. Yet the most substantial objects in this view of Price's unbuilt Potteries Think Belt educational complex are not the futuristic capsules or ghostly housing modules in the midground, but rather the stubborn remainders of the past, the background looming slag heaps, a derelict shed in the foreground. Price seems to understand that in a world governed by obsolescence, the undead waste of the past may come to haunt the promise of the future, a contradiction of the obsolescence paradigm. What of the remainders? Indeed, in the same post-war period, others set out to overcome the contradictions of obsolescence. Instead of fast, unceasing change, stop development in its tracks, with monumental concrete permanence and an expanding preservation movement, which measured architectural value not by economic quantification, but cultural emotion, to which the obsolescence paradigm had been blind. Or slow down change by celebrating glacial vernacularism or promoting adaptive reuse, gradual change in the palimpsest of exposed brick walls, thus revaluing what had been considered obsolete, as postmodernism also did by resuscitating older architectural languages or salvage architecture. Facilities management, a profession of repair and reuse, emerged as a distinct discipline at this time too, nurturing building maintenance and longevity. All these tactics, I fell behind there. All these tactics to reverse rather than accept obsolescence received an historical push by the energy crises of the early 1970s, which dramatized obsolescence's wastefulness and helped pave the way to our current dominant paradigm of change in architectural culture, sustainability, the conservation rather than expendability of existing resources, both natural and human-made, as in the German Federal Environmental Agency building, a high-tech system of energy efficiency under glass, built of renewable materials on reclaimed industrial land. Its contextualist facade color-coded to its environment: green park, red factories, orange apartment blocks. Yet the sustainability has its own contradictions. Even as it promises a brighter future, can sustainability deliver dramatic change when its fundamental ethics are conservation and continuity? When contextualist design presumes permanent surrounding fixity? Can sustainability's austerity deliver either the growth that capitalism craves or justice to the world's impoverished? Does sustainability's universalist faith contradict its avowed localism? Indeed, might these contradictions of sustainability lead to a next, post-sustainable paradigm? What lessons, then, in this brief history of changing paradigms of change? First is that paradigms of change are themselves changeable creations. Obsolescence, then sustainability. Each solved structural tensions to rationalize capitalists' creative destruction, to resolve obsolescence's own blindnesses. And the next paradigm, of which there surely will be one, may address sustainability's contradictions. But the shape of the future is not wholly predetermined by structural dialectics. It takes the agency of people and institutions, as well as contingent events, to produce history. Ultimately, the present is never permanent, history teaches, and the future insusceptible to divination. This is what Nabokov meant by the phrase, "The future is but the obsolete in reverse," that we are as estranged from our unknowable future as we are from our expended past. Unpredictable futures might, however, be seen as liberating, clearing the ground for new possibilities and radical emancipatory alternatives, as did the paradigm of obsolescence. A final lesson from the history of obsolescence may be ultimately to accept with humility the fundamental unmanageability of change, including in architecture, and to acknowledge and perhaps even welcome endings. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for those great remarks, and thanks, Liz, Ken, and Meg, Francesca, Alyssa, and all the rest of the people behind the magazine for your hard work. It was great. For me, the theme of reuse and repair was really resonating because when I first came to Chicago to start my practice, it was in the midst of the big scandal, which was Operation Silver Shovel, which was a bit about illegally dumping construction debris on a neighborhood in North Lawndale, which was 6 stories high and about 5 blocks long and 2 blocks wide. And it continued on for a number of years in this kind of unjust way of debris and waste being dumped on a neighborhood, but especially this construction debris, how much of it there was because of the change in Chicago was really moving to me. And starting this issue with Liz really opened up also new ways of thinking about reuse that went beyond architecture and to think about the history of cities, the economic and political side of reuse and repair. So then, as you can see in this diagram, the approach to reducing emissions from this kind of demolition, going along the sustainability line, it really ends up being highlighted by the top 2 best emission savings approaches in this diagram, which are to delay the demolition of buildings, but also to increase their capacity and to make them work harder. So that was a diagram from my recent book that came out, which was called The Art of Architectural Grafting, which is really about how we need new metaphors and new ideas for this kind of creativity in that could be found in this practice of adaptation and reuse. An example of that creativity, I guess, is present in this building. This is a big government building, brutalist building in D.C. That we had proposed. It was a one long building that we proposed slicing and kind of pruning back to create two different buildings that would be more economically viable and also save these buildings. And this ends up becoming pertinent in one of the essays by Angela Pearson, who wrote this really great essay about these buildings, and she worked on the exhibition at the National Building Museum in D.C. that highlighted that Forrestal building, but other buildings by other architects. And her essay in the magazine really explores brutalist federal buildings and this loss that we face through their demolition. But it's not only about the environmental integrity, it's also about the economic responsibility, but especially the cultural memory that they represent. So that just brings me to this piece that when we were talking about the different people we were inviting to contribute essays, Liz brought up the point of, what is the resistance to reuse and repair, and what are schools doing about that, and how is it being taught, and is it being required in courses? And the thing is, I couldn't really answer that question at the time, and it's really striking because I know that I was teaching reuse and repair for option studios, and I know some other architects were doing that, but we really didn't know, the state of it in terms of the overall, U.S. academic landscape. And so for this piece, we decided to invite not only the teachers of reuse and repair, but deans, so, academic people, but also regulators throughout the country. So it's really a dialogue with them, and just to sort out and to try to suss out what the state of the reuse in architecture schools was. So some of the things that came out, this just to give you a sense of who we ended up talking to. We focused on people that were already interested in reuse in some way. Of course, UC Berkeley's dean, Renee Chow, she's the head of their College of Design. We talked to Ned Crankshaw. He's the dean of University of Kentucky. He's actually has a landscape background, but is in a reused building in the whole School of Landscape Historic Preservation and architecture all lives together. Francesco Javier Rodriguez Suarez, he's the director of University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and they've been starting to make that more and more prevalent as a studio. And then, of course, Deborah Burke, who's the dean of Yale School of Architecture, whose practice itself includes reuse and adaptation of buildings. Then we went to also educators and scholars, Nicole Bouchard, who is at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she teaches in urban planning. David Fixler, who's here tonight, he's our own Harvard Graduate School of Design professor who focuses on reuse and especially for modern buildings. And then we had, how is this being implemented throughout the schools? Kathy Ho Shar, who is part of the Association for Collegiate Schools of Architecture, who helps determine curriculum, and then finally these two from the National Architectural Accreditation Board, which they would be the ones that would be deciding if reuse and repair would be necessary or required in terms of accreditation. And so as we spoke about these things, some themes started to emerge. after speaking to everyone, what was unsurprisingly, everybody considered reuse and repair important for architects' education. And they explain that there's a growing number of seminars and electives that are about reuse, but it's not a recurring theme in design studios. It has not been as popular in design studios or widely required. There were disagreements around if reuse should be, like when it should be introduced in an architect's education. Should it be in the very beginning when you have something to start from? Should it be toward the end when it's because of the complexity? Or if it should be required at all for the degree? And then we talked a lot about barriers as well. Like that seemed to be a lot of numerous barriers for teaching it. And some were talking about these kind of institutional inertia that happens in big state schools, slow-moving bureaucracy. Some mentioned that there's just a lack of school-wide curriculum discussions, and they don't have time to meet and talk about these things. What was interesting, I thought, was as we got to the National Architectural Accreditation Board, there was both kind of an obstacle there, but also a potential for direct change if we think that this is something that should be taught. And they spoke about that there really isn't any requirement at the time right now for architectural program to require this in the curriculum, but they also said that if it is wanted, and they only update this like every 8 years, if it is wanted, then every 8 years there's this forum where practitioners, students even, and academics can kind of lobby for this change that could happen in the next 8 years. The good news is, guess what? The next one is, and the architectural review forum is in 2027. So if we really think that this is serious, it's a chance for activation around that meeting. And then just as something that we looked at overall at the end was looking back to how, this kind of goes along with Daniel's point, that how reuse and repair has been treated over time. And what we saw in their every 8-year statements was that little by little sustainability was indeed creeping in to, but very small amounts, that architects should have some education in how they put it was enabling future architects to mitigate climate change. That was there. But we found that the term reuse was once there, but then eventually was dropped in the most current version. So not to have a conspiracy theory or anything like that, but it is just no longer there. So with that, on that note, I want to hand it over to architects and educators Alison Von Glinow and Lapchi Kwong, who founded the Chicago-based practice Kwong Von Glinow. And Alison and Lapchi are GSD alumni, and also they are teaching here now. And so for this issue, I will let them talk about it, but they really had a way of taking this like a collaborative approach to an update and reuse of a current building, and I will let them share more about that now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeannie, and thank you, Liz, Jeannie, Ken, and Sarah for inviting us into this issue. We're very grateful to be a part of it. So we want to share about the project that we were commissioned to reconsider through the lens of repair and reuse for the Chicago Architecture Biennial, as well as the Harvard Design Magazine. So it starts with the Chicago Horizon Pavilion, which marked the inaugural Chicago Architecture Biennial in 2015 and was designed by Aaron and Yasmin Bobis of Ultramodern, with Brett Schneider as the structural engineer. And their project was selected through a competition for the first biennial under artistic director Sarah Herda and Joseph Grimes, whose theme was the state of the art of architecture. And since its opening, the Chicago Horizon has been beloved by Chicagoans, by the public, and by architecture enthusiasts. And when we have friends come visit Chicago, this is one of the first buildings we say they have to go visit. So in the spring of this year, we were kind of late to this project, starting in April, I think. Florencia Rodriguez, this year's artistic director of Cab 6, asked us if we would be interested to reconsider a new future for Ultramodern's Pavilion as a co-commission project by Cab and the Harvard Design Magazine. So we were asked to rethink the structure under the biennial's theme of shift and Harvard Design Magazine's this year's theme of repair and reuse. And we were extremely honored and excited, but at the same time also extremely nervous about how we could contribute to what we already saw as a very complete project by a practice that we deeply admire. So we started out by understanding what these distinct but complementary terms meant in order to help us approach the project. And we loved what we came upon the definition of shift as a slight change in position. So it didn't need to be a big move or a complete 180 pivot. We saw that this term shift could be expressed as a slight modification while keeping the essence of the project. And so likewise, one of the prompts by Jeanne and Liz struck us as incredibly meaningful and relevant and helped us think through our approach. And they asked, how can the rewards of the profession be recalibrated to appreciate and encourage a new kind of originality built on reuse and repair? So we started by getting to know the original pavilion and understanding Ultramodern's intentions, and we saw how they were extremely interested in how the Chicago Pavilion could reference Mee's experiments in flatness with the thinness of the CLT roof while emphasizing a new artificial horizon. So at the beginning of the summer, Asaf Efron, an artist, photographed the pavilion in its current state, and the images are beautiful and throughout the magazine. And he captured the structural ingenuity of the pavilion, its thinness and flatness, and its connection to Chicago. At the same time, his images capture the existing conditions of the pavilion. Having not been regularly sealed over the last 10 years, the pavilion shows signs of the natural decay of aging wood and water stains. The bleacher seating has been fenced off and only a couple benches remain, so it's difficult to make use of the underside of the pavilion. And not least, the kiosk has not been maintained and can't be used by parks for concessions in its current state. And lastly, the hard ground surface has broken glass and water seeping into the interior that makes it difficult for seating on the ground. So after observing this, we became interested in how decay could start to reveal through decomposing. And we liken decomposing to subtracting. As in nature, the leaf maintains its recognizable form and structure in spite of decomposition. And while the material is missing from the original structure, the form is perhaps more powerful in its decomposed form. So we wanted to show off the beauty of the original structure. We studied the original structural plan of the existing pavilion, which shows a plaid organization of the CLT blanks and 13 columns that support it. There's a very clear assembly and form to this project. And we also want to say how Yasmin, Aaron, and Brett were extremely generous in supporting this project, but also collaborating with us by sharing all of their material, their white papers on the project, and also giving very considerate feedback to the project as it was developed. And so this is an image of their crew installing the plaid CLT blanks together in 2017. The blue lines from the previous plan show the screws that are drilled at an angle to join the blanks together, and these are essential to maintaining the structural integrity of the thin roof. So we start every renovation project by studying the drawings intensively, but at the same time we model the existing conditions to understand what is there, what works, what doesn't work, and where are their potentials. So our first intuition was how can we keep this original roof and the 13 arrayed columns, but add a new experience to the pavilion. So we started drilling holes as a way to reveal and at the same time bring light under the expansive canopy. On a previous project for a residential art gallery, we cored a large flower-shaped opening into a former bomb shelter to serve as a skylight in an immersive concrete room. And we saw that the effect was powerful there. A very dark space had become full of light and had a lighter spatial experience. So we proposed to overlay a pattern of drilled holes in the shape of flowers to further reveal the original structure and bring a new and playful atmosphere to the pavilion interior. Abstracted from the structural plan, a field of flowers playfully articulates the structural properties of the roof, and the areas without flowers are where there are columns or structural screws. To do this, we found a common CLT tool used for coring plumbing shafts. This is a Rothoblast LB hole cutter that can drill 5.5-inch radius holes. And if you do several of them, they can form flower-shaped patterns into the CLT roof.
We study many types of openings, single opening, cluster of opening, different size opening to see what would reveal the original structure grid and create a new experience under the canopy. We came up with 4 flower types that range from a 3-petal to a 6-petal flower with only one lucky fall-leaf clover. Our proposal name Forget Me Not reference the blue 5-petal flower, which have the greatest number of skylight in the pavilion. When we applied this pattern subtraction to a half-inch study model, we saw the effect of these drilled openings. While the expensive CLT plane has created a dark contrast of the interior space to the exterior space to emphasize the horizon and the amazing view of the Lake Michigan, once the opening were drilled, we could understand a new spatial experience like under a tree canopy in the park. As we developed this project, we were very happy to receive a text message from Sarah Herder showing us the Jardin Luxembourg in Paris. After a great review with Jeanne of the project, where she talked about the power of creating a usable and comfortable pavilion in the public park, we understood the importance of making this space as dry as possible. We started working with dome skylight manufacturer to cover each of the skylight. We started to capture the new effect of the skylight while also introducing a new soft ground made of cocaine. The light is not dissimilar to being under a tree canopy. You feel covered, but within nature. A playful pattern of flower create a feel of the new soft ground. To confirm this, we create a 1-to-1 mock-up to study how the light and nature will enter the space. The roof mock-up enables us to explore and identify the optimal size of each flower opening and understand the visibility of the CLT layer in the opening. We were convinced that this had potential to reuse the existing pavilion while keeping its essence at the forefront. The thinness of the structure is maintained, while the subtraction highlights the structural makeup of the pavilion. Forget Me Not Pavilion, we used the ultra-modern original pavilion honor the design while creating a new interior experience under the thin canopy by revealing the inherent structure. A new enclosed kiosk is added in the former bleacher area and bring revenue to the park to help offset the maintenance costs. The light penetrating through the roof canopy offers a new way to experience a covered space. Movable furniture can be used flexibility under the canopy. For the biennial, we have a 2.5-inch scale model of the Forget Me Not Pavilion in the Cultural Center first floor. We set the height intentionally so that people can see the new roof flower patterns. There is a slow moving rotation spotlight that shows how the flower will transform over the course of the day on the ground. There are our baby, Mani and Johan. You can also bend down to look into the models. It changes as the spotlight rotates around the pavilion. We really like the idea of reuse and repair and shift. That in a way we have changed a lot, but also not much. We simply subtracted. We have a great visiting cap with our student 2 weeks ago. Thank you.
So we'll be joined by all the speakers now for a panel.
He's on. Yeah, is it on? Yeah, you can hear. So I guess I'll start us off. Thank you to our participants, our contributors. It was really great to hear you talk in person about what we had dealt with as text. Acknowledging your point, Danny, that we don't know what the future holds, we're now dealing with the present. And still, there are a lot of tensions, as I think Jeanne's experience with the educators pointed out, between sustainability and sort of building anew. And so we wondered that, and I should just say that all of this is happening, of course, in the shadow of the East Wing of the White House being torn down today and yesterday and going forward. I just would like to raise the question about what you think are the major obstacles to actually embracing reuse and repair, when you think there can be incentives that are effective in getting people to actually take that approach seriously, and maybe we'll just sort of brainstorm a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we can share a personal experience from our 8-year-old practice. We're about 75% of our practice, at least, maybe a little more, is reuse and repair projects. Normally, as a younger practice, you're not given a blank piece of land and a big budget to start a new project. So it's something not by choice, but something that is almost pretty natural, I think, for younger practices starting out. And we've been lucky with the clients that come to us with these projects that normally if they're purchasing something that's existing, it's not to tear it down. We haven't had that experience yet. So we've sort of had the very positive experience of reuse and repair, where the client or owner really is a custodian of what they've purchased and understand sort of their historic role in its future. So our projects are on the smaller scale, but we've gotten to work on maybe some named buildings like MD Anderson Hall with Sterling, which was also his repair and reuse in addition to the building, and now we've done a repair and reuse for some of his spaces to make way for kind of the contemporary mission of Rice School of Architecture, like making a welcoming center for them or a student forum. So I think a lot of, at least the projects we've been involved with, there have been stewards involved as these building owners and clients. And I think, that's very important, but also rare in some cases that to have that personality and interest in the building.
I was going to say that I agree with you. Early on, maybe there were more reuse and repair projects that came to us as a practice, but nowadays it's usually already decided. Whatever is standing there, it's gone, and you're going to do this. The assignment is to build a new project. That's very different also from Europe, in our work in Europe, where it's the opposite, where they almost don't want anything new added on to the building at all. So it's very different. But what I was thinking about from your experience, do you think that there could be a place for architecture practice to be more in a role of advising clients before they make those decisions about tearing something down? Or because I think that maybe the creativity of reuse and repair and reinvention actually is not, I don't think that people understand what it could become. And so I was wondering if you think that there would be a place for that kind of practice, and if there was, what would be other things that we would need to add to architectural education, or collaborators that might be involved to make that a pertinent or very prominent or interesting type of practice? You guys?
I think from Jeanne and Liz, I think one of the obstacles is about to prove there is a value beside the money. And as Alison mentioned, most of our work is renovation type of project, and in a way that it's a lot of work on the front end that in a blank piece of paper, it seemed maybe a little bit less work to try to understand what's the existing condition, and we often have to bring into the consultant mechanical structural to be in the really upfront that we even to see the possibility, is there actually a chance to even repair and reuse at the same time? Can we actually prove to them also on the contractor side that we may be able to save certain type of money in certain area because of repair and reuse? So there's a lot of front end that you have to prep instead of doing a normal typical new build project. Yeah.
But in terms of like education, I love the idea that this does not become a specialty type of practice, but really a general type of practice, because it's just encountered so much that it would be nice that this is just integrated into the curriculum. Every studio we've taught has been repair and reuse in some way, and I think it just kind of comes natural to architects, and as a way of education, like beginning with a built project to learn from it, to know how to work with it.
Yeah, and then just in terms of like understanding the assemblies, it's a lot easier to think about something that's already there, and then it allows you to think about how it might be different in the future. How could you reinvent that thing? So it seems like it would go right along with the complete building understanding, but it was interesting to find out that not required at all, and a lot of places don't even touch it.
This discussion is focused on sort of convincing the client that there's value and putting the burden on the client, and then also on the educational experience. But what about the reward structure within the field of architecture? How can that be shifted, to use your term, so that actually the creativity that Jeanne, you have talked about throughout this process we've been through, that's really involved in reuse and repair, can be rewarded within the profession?
I think there.
Danny, do you have any thoughts on
Danny,
that? You're somebody who studies the profession of architecture.
I can speak only from a historian's point of view. In terms of what you were saying about revaluing or valuing it, architectural history does not celebrate or prioritize teaching repair and reuse. An introduction to the history of architecture is not a sequence of repair and reuse projects. You're laughing, but how could that possibly change? Can you imagine someone who wants to do a PhD applying to the program here and saying they want to look at the repair records of Peabody Terrace? And would that person be accepted? Could they go get a tenure-track job with that? Could they get a university press to publish the book? And most importantly, would Harvard tenure someone whose archive was a series of repair records? So, because then that person could teach the history of architecture as a history of repair and reuse. So that's one obstacle. The other thing I'd say is that in my study of obsolescence, the only time that architects were paid to study obsolescence or took it upon themselves to do so was when there was kind of a governmental context. That is, the tax code and the uncertainty of those depreciation numbers made study of obsolescence urgent for building owners, and then once they got their favorable tax, they stopped studying it. In England, in the 1950s, the welfare state had to fund new hospital construction, and so the government paid for in-detail obsolescence studies. And then when that was over, it was over. So when you ask about obstacles, it is who's going to pay you to do the type of research where you could really understand it and act from it, because I imagine that your clients are not just going to pay you for research. So those are a couple of thoughts from a historian's point of view about kind of obstacles and what might need to change.
It seemed for a while in our society that a selling point was the climate benefits of and resource use of attention to sustainability over new building. Right now, we seem to be in a different moment, and I wonder how deep you think the transition in thinking has been towards embracing that, or will it go the way of EV cars and solar energy and all the things that are now being sort of discouraged rather than encouraged? I'm just wondering how deep you think. We certainly see that in the architecture schools, there doesn't seem to have been a huge emphasis put on resource use and the benefits of reuse, but are architects sort of talking to each other about the resource benefits of sustainability? What do you architects have to say?
I can speak for, I mean, the thing that's so interesting is, you know, I mentioned in practice in Europe, because of regulations of carbon, embodied carbon, limiting embodied carbon, it really necessarily puts you into reusing as much as you can. Of course, most of the carbon is in structure and foundations. So if you can reuse those, build another level on top of a building, you know, that you're doing already a lot, and the building could take on a different aesthetic or a different design, and you would be doing a lot for, you know, keeping the carbon footprint minimized. But here in the U.S., that just is not in the, it's not in the cards yet for the foreseeable future to have these carbon, you know, discussions about limiting embodied carbon. However, industry is still moving forward, and it's not like solar panels are over. I mean, there is a lot of new technology coming online that is still happening, even if it's not being regulated. But the whole point about obsolescence is still deeply ingrained in that you hear it coming out of people's mouths that you cannot use this brutalist building because it is just obsolete, and there just isn't an opportunity to get the creative approaches in front of the decision makers. And that's what I feel like we as architects would need to do, is to have services that analyze and bring value to owners that are making those kind of decisions.
I mean, I think that's really important, especially like in the context of the renovation of this pavilion in the park, because parks might see it a lot easier to just remove this instead of having to renovate this, rework this existing structure. So I think proving to them the value of keeping this structure, keeping this as an amenity for the public in the park, like these things are very important that architects can really visualize and creatively show them how this is important to maintain and rethink its use.
To the question about the rewards or how the profession could reward these kind of practices, I thought of your project, especially because, you know, a lot of young architects are coming into the profession through installations of, let's say, new pavilions or fairs or biennials or biennales, and asked to produce new pavilions and new exciting things. But that could be one way, as you know, if to reframe that kind of installation work into something like what you did, where you are acting on something that's there, but with very fresh, interesting ideas. And I think, you know, highlighting your project is part of that, you know, reward system. People will see that, and that could be furthered, I think, Liz, in terms of the recognition for new practices.
I think we maybe one more issue that we can raise, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Historic preservation has been a major way that we have saved buildings, and I think most people in this room are fully aware of how often that is based on and contributes to further gentrification. So I'm wondering whether there is much discussion of, in fact, utilizing existing structures in providing some buildings that are more used by a more diverse population. And the example that comes to my mind is we often talk about the need for affordable housing. How often do you hear people say there's an existing structure that could be adapted to that? Or is it generally assumed that you're just going to look for some open land or some building that's no longer relevant, and that's where you'll put it, and it will be a new structure? So I just wonder if you might think a little bit about the class dimension of reuse and repair.
That's not something we've necessarily, yeah.
There was just an article in the Globe, I think a week or so ago. Sarah, you're nodding your head, you'll remember which municipality it is. To increase their affordable housing stock, they bought an old building, and it's cheaper to rehab it than to build new. I think that keep people there. I mean, my answer would be, gentrification is oftentimes a matter, as you're saying, of class ownership, of class of property ownership. So the way to keep people there might be to decommodify the building, which is to keep it under public ownership rather than property owning. When the other one would be affordable housing is existing housing. I know in other countries, like in Zurich in Switzerland, the affordable housing that the state owns is spread throughout the inner city. It's just buying up older buildings when they come. So that is one way. Those are some ways to kind of work within the gentrification paradigm.
Of course, that's all assuming a kind of robust public sector that's going to take that kind of lead, have regulations that Jeanne has pointed to that can incentivize reuse, and we're not there. So shall we open it up to questions from the floor? Are you going to run around?
I'm not going to. I have a question.
Okay.
So I want to dig a little bit into the editorial collaboration of Liz and Jeanne and how you danced across the challenge of this topic of, on the one hand, chiding and showing us examples or histories of where reuse and repair wasn't honored and the waste that has gone into that. But also celebrating examples, and I think the Forget-Me-Not Pavilion it's a beautiful story, and the way you presented it was really terrific. But can you talk a little bit more about how you two balance the issue, or how you tried to capture a very big, difficult issue into one beautiful magazine, which I realize we probably should have used recycled paper for this copy.
I know it's very shiny for something that's about reuse. I think it's like in any collaboration, and for something like this, first it got very, very, very big, and then we had to kind of try to rein it in. And it was just really interesting to work together to get those different lenses on what was relevant for this issue, and then to be surprised even by other people that were invited in to see how their lenses on it. So it really expanded my mind about the issue, especially working with Liz, whose background is much more on the city and post-industrial cities, especially. So that was great. I think it was something that opened it up for me.
I would say that I expected us to have more tension or disagreement than we actually had, because I think partly you do really think hard about these issues, and you do think historically. And I came in with one major commitment, which is that I didn't think we could only think of reuse and repair in terms of one building. That it was really important to me that we embrace it on a larger scale, a neighborhood, a downtown, a city. That was my sort of historian's orientation, but that was not really hard to convince you of. So I actually think it worked quite well.
It is big. When you start thinking that it's everything, which it kind of is, because you always have to start with something. So it was then more a process of like getting it narrowed down a little bit.
And we had like a checklist of issues that we cared about, whether it was pedagogy, whether it was the profession, whether making sure we were international, representing, having some racial diversity. There was a whole lot of concerns, and so that helped to structure what we focused on. Who's going to do this? Okay.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for beautiful lectures. I'm Shelly, and I'm a Mark I student in my currently third year. And my question is, I really love like what you mentioned about adaptive reuse and repair, and what's the meaning behind it, and how we nowadays think about it, not just the economic behind it. And my question is, as architects, how does the structure function, and how, like, if we want a building to stand, and if the structure is too old and to be renovated, if the value is huge enough for us to continue working with the built structure, or do we just create a similar structure on top of it? And as historians' point of view and scholars' point of view, I'm wondering what's the meaning behind the structure in terms of history? Are we preserving the culture behind it? Or are we preserving the actual built method behind it? I'm just really curious about this. Thank you.
Well, those are really good questions, I would say. I mean, you have to answer the parts about whether it's financially worth saving a building that is decaying. The second half of your question about the historical value is a very good one. I think it does suggest the importance of interpreting and sharing why you're saving a particular structure. And that may mean some interpretation that goes along with it. Often scale would be a reason, in my mind, to want to keep a building rather than put up something that might be financially more feasible in today's economy. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's, as an architect, I think we find it in our practice very exciting to begin with something. Of course, we have to assess it. But I think if there's a possibility of finding space within the existing building, that's the most exciting thing. And then whether you need to sister the structure and make it work, or depending on the state of it, I think that's all something. But I think the most, as a practice interested in making space, if you're already able to have space and rework it in a way, I think that can be just very exciting to have that conversation between old and new.
I have a good example of everything that you mentioned in that question, where we were asked to renovate and add on to the Kresge College at UC Santa Cruz, which was designed originally by Charles Moore, who I didn't know, to be honest, I didn't know his work that well. I did know he did that, and I became fascinated with his approach to that college, which was, he did it with this kind of engaging with students, and had this whole philosophy about how they could change their spaces, and it was really a very cool 60s, 70s kind of approach. Well, as we were carefully, renovating, thinking of how to renovate his buildings and add to the whole campus and make it accessible and protect all the trees and all that, as we got into his buildings, of course, they were built in the 70s with stucco and wood, and it turned out that there was so much mold, and they were falling apart, basically. So then it became, you can't really save those buildings as they were, so the sustainability part was not there. But at the same time, the college had such a strong history of why it was formed that way. So the answer was kind of to rebuild them like they were, but with better detailing, I guess, but also adding capacity to them. So we found a way to add one more floor on the back side that wouldn't be visible in the main thoroughfare. So it's kind of, we had to make all of those calls, every single thing that you mentioned, and it was not like there was one answer, but that we had to think through it and reason through it and decide what was important about his original buildings and the campus and the college there, and what to keep and what to change and what to, edit out. And so it was, but that is a fascinating project when you have all of that, and some new buildings too, which was kind of fun, done with mass timber and in the redwood forest.
I think one way to approach the idea of what you would keep and what you wouldn't is to find out what works and what doesn't by talking to the people there. So many times in the past when buildings were denoted obsolete, it was because people were tallying what was the matter and adding that up, and instead of seeing what actually worked about urban renewal. So if you can, for yourself, or ask other people, like, what's good about this, or what they like, if there's anything, then maybe that's worth keeping.
Great answer.
Hi, my name is Caro. I'm a first-year Master of City Planning student at MIT, and I'm really compelled by this question of obsolescence. I work for a design studio called Monument Lab, and in the monument world, the question of, reuse and repair, I think, is really present. And like, do you contextualize an old monument somehow, or do you do away with it in totality? And we were actually working at the American Museum of Natural History this summer, and obviously encountered your work there, and was just so compelled by how the American Museum of Natural History is such a key site to think about reuse and repair, because it has 250 scientists on staff, but also has these cultural halls that haven't been updated in like 60 plus years. And so I was, this maybe is a more pointed question for you, but was just interested in your design of that space, how you brought in these questions of reuse and repair to such a contentious site that has, deep historical problems, but also is also so forward-thinking in its mission.
Yeah, I think that is, with that building, one of the reasons why it was able to be done in such a kind of, let's say, radical way that that we did do the wing, was just because of the working with the science researchers and their kind of open mind. It was incredible to work with them. And but that museum it's constantly renewing itself, and I know that they are working on what to do with these outdated halls and all, because it's about natural history and science. Attitudes are changing more so than with, say, an art gallery where you have paintings that people look at that you might have to recontextualize with maybe some text, but here it's like whole exhibits of what people thought at that time. So, but they do have a very open-minded attitude, and that was really refreshing to work with.
As an historian, and I wouldn't be in a position to be doing this, but if I were faced with that challenge, I would love to have a piece of exhibition that actually showed visitors the changes in the way anthropologists, ethnographers, whatever, have encountered and exhibited what they have collected out there in the world. And there have been huge changes in the ethics of that profession, in the way artifacts were displayed, and it would be really wonderful, I would think, to have a small piece. I don't know if it would in fact be considered kosher to do, but to actually show the evolution of our approach to that kind of material.
Or it could be about regrouping it instead of making it focused on peoples of a certain area. Could it be on, comparing across all human production, different, tools or whatever, so I think there's many ways to rethink it that I think they are currently going through. But it's true, it's fascinating to just think of the history itself, like dioramas, like go kill animals and then put them forever in a diorama. But and in itself, it is already just experiencing it, going through it, you see the change over time.
Hello, I'm Sophia. I'm actually an alumni of the MArch II program from 2015, and I'm really excited to be here just for a couple of days. What a great coincidence to join for this lecture. Thank you. I was really curious more on the topic of regulation that you brought up, Jeanne. You may have come across an initiative that has been, it's called House Europe by B+ office and ETH Zurich in Europe, that basically is a citizen-run initiative that is collecting now a sufficient number of signatures to bring the issue of non-demolition before the European Parliament. And so I think that in that way, even in Europe, it's not enough just to have sustainability as the answer. And so some of the things that they're proposing as part of this kind of initiative is to look at ways and tools that can create incentives. For example, reducing VAT taxing on demolition versus new construction, and other such things. And for example, in Brussels, just this year, a new law was passed that basically requires any architect or any developer as part of their process to submit drawings to the city that show that non-demolition is not an option. And so I wonder, in that way, besides just this tax initiative that you, Daniel, brought up, are there other precedents in the US, and what are other ways that through regulation change can be made?
You need someone from the Kennedy School of Government to answer that question. It's a great question. I mean, obviously regulation is really important. The state framework legislates certain values for building or for demolition, and I think,
but we're also in a moment when I think regulation is being viewed as the obstacle to providing the affordable housing and the diversification of and so forth. So we have to really, I think, work hard to refine what kind of regulation we're talking about, and make sure that it achieves those ends, because the abundance argument is now sort of taking off, which is this recent book that's suggesting that the reason we have such a housing crisis is because we have all these regulations that keep people from building, many of them environmental and so forth.
It's also just not one answer. I think it's like there should be incentives. That's a great point to reusing buildings. Think of school closures, and those could be great residential buildings. But at the same time, there also needs to be new construction, new housing that's done. So it's not mutually exclusive. So finding the qualities in reuse that are beyond regulation also I think is a very important thing that we architects can bring to it. I just want to finally, I think we have a few minutes, I wanted to get back to Daniel's essay, because at the end of it you bring up this, like, the problems of obsolescence, for example, but also that it may be the positive thing is the idea of being open to change. And so I was going to ask you earlier, but I'd love to hear more about if you think that that is something as a way forward for now, this idea of not just flexibility in buildings, but the openness about change.
Can you say a little more? Jeanne? I'm sorry. Maybe I'm stalling for time.
Well,
of course, I think change is really important. As Liz said, that's what historians study, which is we assume that change will happen and has always happened in the past. And so, as I said, the present is never permanent, and this should be liberating and freeing, which means that the present is not the way it's always going to be, and that is to be embraced. And sometimes that means letting go of the past, but it's your job as architects to help us decide what we're going to keep. But change should be seen as liberating.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
That I think is the point that I wanted to underline of your essay, which I found a really, positive, because it's not just one thing or the other, but just know that whatever we're talking about today is also going to change in the future. So just having this kind of in the back of the mind is useful for us as creators and designers. Thank you.